Hey guys. All right, this is going to be the first of our lessons for the material for the rest of the year. I'm going to do about 10 of these videos, and what we're going to do is I'm just going to spend about a good 15 to 30 minutes in each video, and we're going to look at the notes, and I'm going to explain a little more, pretty much what I do in class, to where I'm just going to give a little bit more explanation as to what's in the actual notes. The notes are pretty much an outline. You guys know that by now. And so that's what the videos are going to be designed to do, is that it will be me explaining what is in the notes, um, to help you fill out your study guides. All right, so just to kind of bring us up to speed from where we were at before the break, we're right in the middle of the Civil War, and it's very bad timing in regards to trying to pick up where we left off. But that's the hand that we were dealt. Okay, so just a quick review, because tonight we're going to get into the Battle of Gettysburg. And that's what we're going to focus on in this video, is the Battle of Gettysburg, which was seen as probably the most important battle of the Civil War. So up to this point, what we talked about is that we have seen several different battles. We've seen a going back and forth. Again, this is the war in the East, primarily in Virginia. If you look at my wonderful map here, this is Virginia. This is West Virginia, which, if you remember, these counties in the western part of Virginia did not want to secede in 1861. So that's where West Virginia came from. And I will just note that here. All right, that is West Virginia, and this is the wrong marker. And then up here is going to be Pennsylvania, Maryland, and then, of course, Virginia right there. Okay, and I hope that you can see that fairly well. I'll go back to the map here in just a minute, give you a better view of this as we go further along. But we have looked at basically going back and forth with the war in the East. And let me kind of position this a little bit better to where you can see that map a little better. But if you keep in mind what we talked about here in the war in the East is that, again, we're concentrating on Virginia. Keep in mind that the capital of the Confederacy is here in Richmond. That's Richmond right there. And then, of course, the capital of the United States is Washington, D.C., which is right here. So, again, you see that there's really not that much difference in between the two capitals of the Confederacy and of the United States. And so what we have seen here in the war in the East are several different attempts by both sides, both by the United States and by the Confederacy, to take each other's capitals. And that's what the war in the East is primarily concentrated around. You have Robert E. Lee, who is the commander of the Confederate forces here in Virginia. And then you've had several different Union generals. If you think back to a few weeks ago, back in class, the United States Army goes through commanding general after commanding general, because pretty much Robert E. Lee dominates here. And so we've seen a couple different attempts already to where the United States is trying to make it to Richmond to get the Confederacy to surrender. Doesn't work, or at least hasn't worked yet. And we've already seen one attempt by Robert E. Lee to have his own invasion of the North to try to get to Washington, D.C. to make Abraham Lincoln surrender. That led to the Battle of Antietam. Antietam, which, if you recall, was the bloodiest day of the war. Again, we've talked about some very bloody and deadly battles here. Antietam was the bloodiest single day of the war, just across the Maryland state line. You had the Battle of Shiloh in the Western Theater, which again is about 2.5 hours away from here, just outside of Savannah, Tennessee. That was the bloodiest battle in the Western Theater. And then tonight we're going to talk about Gettysburg, which is the bloodiest battle of the entire war. So after Antietam, what you get is that Robert E. Lee has to push back across into the Confederacy. He has to regroup. It gives a lot of momentum to the United States. We have the Emancipation Proclamation that is issued by Lincoln. We talked all about that before the break and what the Emancipation Proclamation did. It did not free the slaves. It only, in its own wording, free the slaves in the rebellion states, which means only in the Confederate states. Did not even free the slaves in the border states of Kentucky and even Maryland. Again, this was something that was very political for Lincoln. It was to try to get people to fight against the Confederacy. We see the role of slavery really becoming a very important part in the war at this point. Keep in mind that the war was not really fought by a lot of people because of slavery. Yes, slavery was a big issue, but it wasn't the primary, or rather, it wasn't the only issue as to why the Civil War was fought. And as we've already talked about, we talk about people that fought for both the North and the South. People fought for different reasons. Not everybody that fought for the Confederacy fought to preserve slavery. Likewise, not everybody in the North fought to end slavery. That was never the thing at this point in time. It was never to end slavery. But the further we go along into this war, that's what it becomes about. It becomes, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, this war changes. It now has a new meaning for people in the United States, and that is a fight towards ending slavery. And that really changes the whole aspect of why this war is being fought. Again, it did not free the slaves. That's not going to come until 1865 with the 13th Amendment. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But it gives a new meaning to the war. Now, again, from this point on, you still have people in the Confederacy that could care less about slavery. Some people in the South even supported the ending of slavery. Same thing in the North. You had people who could care less about slavery that fought for the United States in this war. But the Emancipation Proclamation definitely does bring us into a new era in this war. And what we have after Antietam is we have a couple of major battles. We have the Battle of Fredericksburg right here. I know that's kind of hard to see on the map here. But you have an attempt by the United States trying to make their way once again down towards Richmond here to force the Confederacy to surrender. And Ambrose Burnside makes a very crucial mistake here at Fredericksburg, to where, yes, he does penetrate the city, but he disregards the advice of General Winfield Scott in not trying to attack sooner. And when he gets across the city of Fredericksburg, Robert E. Lee is standing on the other side, and it leads to a very, very bloody battle for the United States. That leads to the Battle of Chancellorsville, which is just a little northwest here of Fredericksburg. So Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, very close. Keep in mind that Chancellorsville is where Stonewall Jackson was shot and killed. Two very important victories for the Confederacy. It stopped that invasion by the United States. The Confederacy once again gains momentum for the first time since Antietam, and it's a very, very important series of events. Especially when it comes to Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was pretty much the second in command to General Lee. Jackson is shot and killed by his own men. He is shot and killed by friendly fire in the late hours of the Battle of Chancellorsville because he had crossed over enemy lines. So after we get through Chancellorsville, we see a couple of different series of events. As we get into the summer of 1863, some very important things happening here. Definitely momentum is on the side of the Confederacy. However, Stonewall Jackson is now dead. And that is very, very important because Jackson was Robert E. Lee's right-hand man. Lee really trusted Jackson and his decision. Matter of fact, the Battle of Chancellorsville took place and was successful because of Jackson. That was basically Jackson's battle. And so after that, what we have is that Robert E. Lee is now going to go on his second invasion of the North. Okay, so Robert E. Lee has the momentum here. He is now going to make the decision of trying to make it across Union lines to once again make it to D.C. to try to get Abraham Lincoln to surrender to end this war. So that's where we pick up in where we left off in the notes, in the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg takes place from July 1st to July 3rd of 1863. So this is the summer of 1863, 2 years into the war. Up to this point, it had pretty much been a Confederate domination. Robert E. Lee was almost unstoppable. Even the Battle of Antietam is seen by a lot of people as a draw. It's really not a win for the North or for the South. Because Lee just puts up a really, really good fight. Let me see if I can get a little more light over here. Help that out. And so what happens here is that because of Fredericksburg, because of Chancellorsville, Lee once again has momentum. And we're going to mark on the map up here the progression of the lines. Okay, so you have Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, which are both Confederate victories. And Robert E. Lee in this attempt to invade the North is that he is not going to go straight up to Washington, D.C. Okay, now there's a reason for this. You got to keep in mind here that for Robert E. Lee to get to D.C., you got a whole slew of Union forces that's protecting the city, and that's protecting a direct route. So what Lee is going to have to do is that if he's going to be successful here, in that he's going to have to go around the lines. So what Lee is going to do here, and I'm going to see if I can position the camera. There we go. All right. He is going to head north across into across into Maryland and into Pennsylvania. And that line is a little too far north. Let's do this right here. He's actually going to go a little further west and then cut back down. Okay, so he's going to go straight into Maryland, into Pennsylvania. He is well into enemy territory here. But what Lee's goal is here is that this is pretty much his war to lose at this point. His plan is to draw the enemy into a battle of his choosing, and that's supposed to take place here at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Okay, Lee knows that the entire Union Army here is chasing him down, and what he's going to do is that he's going to draw them to Harrisburg, and that's where you're going to have one giant battle. And in Lee's mind, this is going to be the battle that ends everything. Lee has the momentum. He has everything on his side at this point if everything goes right. The only thing left to do is to have that one decisive battle, and that battle is supposed to take place at Harrisburg. However, as Lee is marching towards Harrisburg, and that line is still not right, forgive me here, as he's marching towards Harrisburg, what happens is that the United States Army has cut him off. Okay, Lee does have an edge on the Union Army, but not as much as what he thinks. And so what happens is that they're going to chase him, and they're going to pretty much cut him off here at a place called Gettysburg. And so what happens here is that instead of fighting at Harrisburg like Lee wants to, he is forced to open fire at a little town called Gettysburg. And that happens on July 1st, 1863. All right, so let me turn the camera back around as we get into the battle itself. The first day of fighting is going to be basically between Robert E. Lee and his forces against John Buford's forces. We haven't really talked about John Buford a whole lot. We did talk about him a little bit in regards to the leaders of the Civil War, that chart that we did a few weeks ago. Okay, so really John Buford has a cavalry division that's cutting off Lee right here, and it's really Buford's position here that's cutting off Robert E. Lee from making it to Harrisburg. Lee is forced to fight at Gettysburg because of John Buford. Now, Buford really only has one division here. And so his goal is to hold off Lee just long enough until reinforcements come in. And that's going to come from General Reynolds. General Reynolds' 1st Division is supposed to be coming in to give reinforcements. So Buford's goal here is to hold off Lee long enough so that Reynolds' division can come in for reinforcements, and it basically forces Lee into a big old battle. And that's exactly what happens. Now, the Confederates gain ground on the first day of fighting. Buford is successful in holding off just long enough until Reynolds' division does make it to Gettysburg in that first day of fighting. However, you have two things that happen here. After the first day of fighting, Buford has been successful in holding off Lee. The Confederates do gain ground here. Hey, they are entrenched here in the town of Gettysburg. So Robert E. Lee is successful in gaining ground. However, the United States in General Reynolds, which Reynolds is actually killed in the battle itself, But Buford and Reynolds together are going to hold off Lee just enough to where they keep that high ground in what's called Seminary Ridge. And so Lee has a decision to make after this first day of fighting. After all, Lee wanted to fight here at Harrisburg, which is just northeast of Gettysburg. That's where he wants. Okay, Lee wants the ground of his choosing. He wants the high ground. That is something that he does not have here at Gettysburg. So after the first day of fighting, Lee now has a decision to make. Does he stay at Gettysburg and fight here, or does he go around and march his way to Harrisburg to the battle that he wanted? And that's where such a crucial decision comes into play. Keep in mind that General Jackson is now dead. And so General Longstreet has now taken over that position as the right-hand man of Robert E. Lee. Okay, he is pretty much second in command here. And Longstreet pleads with General Lee after the first day of fighting that let's pull around, let's go around Gettysburg straight to Harrisburg. That's where we want to fight. That was the plan all along. So let's go around to Harrisburg. And Lee refuses. He says, yes, Harrisburg was the original intention, but this is where the fighting is. It's not necessarily where we wanted to fight, but the Union Army is right here staring me in the face. Why would I not fight here? And so General Longstreet is pleading with Robert E. Lee, let's not fight here. The Union Army has the high ground. If we wake up the next morning and they have reinforcements, then we're going to be in trouble. So let's go around. Let's make it to Harrisburg, and then let's fight there at a ground of our choosing. And Lee says, no, the fighting is here. The Union Army is here. This is not necessarily where we wanted to fight, but it's where the fighting is going to be. And so this leads to the next 2 days of fighting, and what many people see as a very, very crucial mistake by Robert E. Lee. The second day of fighting is going to be very, very brutal. The bulk of the fighting takes place at two different places called the Devil's Den and Little Round Top. To where the battle line here at Gettysburg is going to stretch for a long ways, about a mile or two, to where it's not just one open battlefield of everybody fighting. There are going to be several different front lines all around the town of Gettysburg. And here at Devil's Den and Little Round Top, you have a terrain that, once again, the United States Army has the high ground. They have the upper hand here, and that's one thing that Longstreet was trying to tell Lee is that, look, General, we don't have the high ground. High ground is crucial in regards to warfare. That's exactly why the Confederacy won the Battle of Fredericksburg. Okay. Once the Union Army got out of the city limits of Fredericksburg, Lee and his entire army had the high ground. And that's what led to basically them dominating at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Well, now things are on the other foot. Now the Union Army has the high ground, and Robert E. Lee is not going to back down. You have a lot of very big rocks at Devil's Den that the Confederate Army is trying to basically maneuver around, while at the same time going uphill. And then at Little Round Top is going to be the farthest left flank of the Union Army. And the goal here by the Confederates is that if they can push that left flank, okay, which basically means if we're looking at a battlefield and the two sides, then we're looking at a point of where you're going to have basically the lines here. Okay, let's say that this is the Union line here. Okay, the far left flank is going to be right here. And at Gettysburg, that's going to be Little Round Top. Okay, if the Confederates push around that line, then basically they can circle in and begin to close in on the enemy. Okay, so they begin to push that line in and in and in until finally the Union Army is surrounded. So this left flank here at Little Round Top is going to be held by General Lawrence Chamberlain of Maine. We haven't really talked about Chamberlain a whole lot either. Chamberlain is one of the most important figures for the Union Army in the Civil War. And Little Round Top is really where Chamberlain becomes somewhat of a superstar within the Union Army. So Little Round Top, you have push after push after push by the Confederate Army going uphill. And And the Union forces here of the 20th Maine, they do end up getting pushed back, but never end up folding. And finally, after I think it's the fourth wave, General Chamberlain, who his men are now out of ammunition, they are now running low on men. Okay, they're pretty much at the breaking point, but they never break, and instead they call in a retreat and take out the Confederate forces. So the fighting at Little Round Top is probably the most important fighting, especially on day two, maybe for the entire battle altogether, because it keeps the upper ground and that left flank for the Union Army. If the Confederates are successful at Little Round Top, then they get behind the enemy and they begin to push, and this battle probably goes the way of the Confederacy. But General Chamberlain, or at this point he's Colonel Chamberlain, and the 20th Maine Regiment stand strong here, and as a result, the Union Army is able to live to fight another day. And the third day, the primary fighting is going to take place at what's called Cemetery Ridge. So after the second day of fighting, Lee realizes that, yes, I made a crucial mistake in fighting here, but there's no turning back now. We've lost too many men. There's too much at stake here. We have to finish this battle. We have to see this battle through. It does not look very good for Lee. Things are not looking in his way whatsoever. But at this point, he has to stick with his decision. He has to stay with the fighting. Longstreet was right. They should not have fought here. But at this point, it's too late. So Lee's plan here is that he is going to try to surprise the Union Army by attacking them where they least suspected. And that's going to be right here in the center of their front lines, okay? If you have the left flank and the right flank, which, again, this is like several miles apart from each other when talking about Gettysburg. But he's already tried to hit the right flank. Now he's going to try to push through the center, okay? He does not think that the Union Army is going to suspect this. He thinks that that's where that's going to be the least defense systems, because if you're the United States, then that's probably the least likely place that Lee is going to hit. Or at least that's what Lee is thinking. And so his plan here is to take all his forces, go right in the middle at Cemetery Ridge. And in doing so, if he is successful, then he is going to split the front lines, okay, break that line in half, and at that point begin to splinter off to basically divide the Union front lines and to eventually surround them to win. This is where we get what's called Pickett's charge. General George Pickett is going to lead the charge here. Pickett had not been involved in Gettysburg up to this point. He is going to be reinforcements that come in at the end of day two, and is going to lead the charge here. And it's pretty much a suicide mission. Okay, Lee's plan here to attack at the center is going to be very, very deadly. Because even though the Union Army was not expecting Lee to attack here, they have a lot of soldiers. This is pretty much where the reserves are. It's where the 20th Maine had pulled back to after getting some relief at the end of the second day of fighting. And so Lee doesn't realize it, but you actually have a lot more Union units here in the center. And so it's going to be very, very ugly. So after 3 days of fighting, what happens is that the Confederacy is going to lose this battle. And this is seen as the turning point of the war. Okay, so when this battle is all said and done, obviously this is going to be a United States victory here at Gettysburg after 3 days of fighting. When it's all said and done, you have 51,000 casualties on both sides. And keep in mind here that a casualty is anyone who is killed, anyone who is wounded, anyone who deserts, missing in action, POW, anybody who is taken out of the fighting is seen as a casualty. Okay, so 51,000 casualties on both sides. Gettysburg is the bloodiest battle of the entire Civil War. Yes, it lasts for 3 days. But it is the bloodiest battle of the entire Civil War. Lee's second invasion of the North is going to fail. The first invasion led to the Battle of Antietam. This loss here is going to be devastating for Robert E. Lee. The Confederates are going to be chased back into Virginia. And from this point on, Lee is not going to have any kind of success. Okay, Lee was dominant in the first 2 years of this war. From this point on, Robert E. Lee cannot find a victory. And he's going to spend the next 2 years of this war, the last 2 years of this war, pretty much running all around Virginia trying to save the Confederacy. Now, on a side note, in the next video, we're going to take a look at, we're going to go back to the Western Theater in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, and we'll talk about the Battle of Vicksburg. But the Battle of Gettysburg ends on July 3rd, going into July 4th, our Independence Day. And the same day on July 4th, the Union Army wins the Battle of Vicksburg in taking the entire Mississippi River. Again, we'll talk about Vicksburg in the next video. But this marked a turning point for the war. On November 19th, a few months after this, Abraham Lincoln is going to go to the battlefield at Gettysburg and give what's called the Gettysburg Address. Begins with 7 years ago. Okay, that's that famous speech by Lincoln that is given at the Gettysburg battlefield, not at the actual Battle of Gettysburg, but a few months later on November 19th. So let's take about the next 4 minutes is all we got left. And let's talk about the end of the war in the East. Now, Ulysses Grant had been given command of the Union Army in March of 1864. Again, the Union Army had gone through commanding general after commanding general after commanding general. None of them had been successful until Gettysburg. While at the same time, Grant had nothing but success in the Western Theater, beginning with Forts Henry and Donelson and Hyman, going down to the Battle of Shiloh and Corinth. Grant was dominant in the Western Theater. So finally, in March of '64, Lincoln promotes Grant to the commanding officer of the entire Union Army, and Grant is going to continue that success. His goal here is to force Robert E. Lee into one decisive battle. Okay, that's what he is trying to do in the last year of this war. Is trying to force Lee into one final battle. In the first week of May, you have the Battle of the Wilderness from May 5th to May 7th. Robert E. Lee is actually going to lead a surprise attack on Ulysses Grant. Lee does not lead a whole lot of attacks, especially surprise attacks. But that's because what's happening is that the Union Army is making a lot of headway down towards Richmond. Okay, they now have momentum again. To where for the rest of this war, I'm going to go ahead and take these lines off. For the rest of this war, the United States goal is going to be at Richmond. So you have several battles in this area right here. A lot of pressure on Richmond. The Battle of the Wilderness is going to be, I believe, in this area right in here. Just to northwest of Richmond. Lee will lead a surprise attack on Grant, and this will be one of the few victories that Robert E. Lee has here after Gettysburg. He just about surrounds Grant, but Grant does not retreat. This is a case of where this should have been a Lee victory, but Grant stands firm and he never retreats. So as a result, Grant does not lose ground, and he stays on the offensive, which means that Grant still has the upper hand, and he is still going to attack time and time again. As we go throughout 1864, then we see a series of battles to where Robert E. Lee is just on the run time and time again. You have the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse in the last part of May, where Grant will lead a surprise attacks against Robert E. Lee. Grant, once again, is almost surrounded here, but slips out of Lee's stronghold. So Lee does have a couple of chances here to get the upper hand on Grant, but never can get the final blow. You have the Battle of Cold Harbor from May 31st to June 12th, where Grant loses 12,000 men. Grant gets the nickname here, the Butcher, because he just refuses to surrender here. Grant was some saw him as a very brutal commanding officer, but he was victorious in doing so. Beginning in June, in the summer of 1864, you have the Second Battle of Petersburg. And what's going to happen is Petersburg is just on the just to the south of Richmond. Okay, Richmond is here, and so what you have here is that Lee and the Confederacy is going to be forced to have a front line here at Petersburg. You have the Battle of the Shenandoah Valley up here in Virginia, in the northern part of Virginia. It is Robert E. Lee's last attempt to take Washington. The Shenandoah Valley Campaign from May of 64 to March of 65 is Lee's last attempt to take Washington, D.C., but it fails. So as we get into 1865, very quickly here, we have the 13th Amendment that's passed by Congress on January 31st of 1865. The 13th Amendment ends slavery. So it's not the Emancipation Proclamation that frees the slaves, it's the 13th Amendment in January of 1865. So the war has 4 months to go before this thing is over with, but the slaves are free now in Maryland, now in Delaware, as well as if you go west here, Kentucky and in Missouri as well. So as it is obvious that the Confederacy is going to lose this war, when they do lose this war, then you're also going to have slavery that is now going to be abolished across the entire United States. So a lot of ramifications here if you're the Confederacy, in that not only is it obvious that you're going to lose this war, but when this war is over, you're going to lose the stronghold on slavery, which again goes back to the economy being based around agriculture. You had the Third Battle of Petersburg in April of 65, and as we get into April, things are just going downhill quickly for Robert E. Lee. He is constantly on the run. You had the Battle of Sailor's Creek, to where Robert E. Lee is almost forced to surrender. Matter of fact, half of his forces, a fourth of his forces have to surrender, including his son. But 3 days later, on April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee finally has to surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse, which is over here to the west of Richmond. And this is Robert E. Lee's last attempt to flee away from the grasp of the United States Army, but it is a failure. Grant is able to encircle Lee's army. He surrounds him. Robert E. Lee has no choice. Robert E. Lee surrenders, and this effectively ends the Civil War at the Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865, and the Civil War is over. So after 4 years of fighting, a very, very brutal war, what you have here is that the Civil War is now over, and the Confederacy has lost their attempt to remain an independent nation. Again, we talked about this when we first started talking about this a few weeks ago, but the Civil War has several different names. It's the American Civil War. It's the war between the states. It's the war for Northern aggression. In reality, this was the second war for independence for the Confederacy. You had the American Revolution almost 100 years earlier for the United States to remain independent from the British Empire. This was the Confederacy, their attempt to remain an independent nation from the United States. The difference here is that the independence is not going to hold. The Confederacy loses this war, they lose their independence. And over the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about what that leads to now that the Confederacy is over with. So the Civil War is over with, ends on April 9th, 1865. I have posted a couple of videos on the Classroom webpage that you can go back and look at. There is an animated map on the Battle of Gettysburg, as well as a couple of other battles. There's a great website called battlefields.org that you can go to pretty much look up any battle of the Civil War. There are a lot of animated maps. You can see a lot of videos, documentaries, a lot of great materials. So I will post a couple of those videos here in the next little while in case you want to watch those as well. It goes into the Battle of Gettysburg a lot further. Okay, next time around, we're going to get back to the war in the West in Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, and then talk about the final pieces of this war.